Hello, welcome to a Rustbelt Ramble. I'm Connor. I'm up here in Glenshaw, Pennsylvania. We're about 5 miles north of Pittsburgh in the Mount Royal Cemetery. That's all the graveyards, that's all the gravestones that you see. And we're looking out over Route 8, which is in this valley down here. And we're up on the ridge line, which is actually the top of a plateau, the Allegheny Plateau. Mount Royal Road's right there. That is the Mount Royal Landmark Tower. It is 100+ feet tall, and it was built to be a landmark. When you are down on Route 8, you can see it from kind of over the ridge. You can see it from Route 8 as it comes down around the valley. It keeps on coming down past Giant Eagle down here, the business park. And it really does work as a landmark. It's quite cool. As you're driving down Route 8, you can really kind of get into the spirit of it. Once you know what it is and you know where it is, you can orient yourself quite well on the landscape. So that way, it's kind of a public service. In fact, this whole cemetery is meant to be a public service. That's really why park cemeteries like this got built and get built and are maintained. There's plenty of other ways that other cultures keep their dead or don't, There's the practice of sky burial where the dead are fed to the vultures, and in that way, this particular incarnation of their life can truly be said to have ended because there's not even a body left to attach to. That's gone as well. It's its own sort of beautiful metaphor for death. And here, the Victorians and the kind of post-Victorians, the generation right after them, the sort of 1900s, 1910s Pittsburgh, they were really thinking about eternity, right? Death is an eternity that they would kind of spend based on how they had done their life, and that it would be better. And at that point, nature was also coming to be seen as kind of something perfect that God had made. There was a growing notion of just how deep the science goes on how species come into being. There was huge strides in cataloging and botanizing the world, and there was a kind of focus on the beauty, the eternal beauty of nature. And as well, that was becoming a growing need in cities, and the idea of having a park like this to bury the dead meant for the living, meant to be walked around in like we're doing now. That's cool. That was a new thought. And I'm glad for it. Especially during these coronavirus times. Just having more civic spaces. It's important. You know, and in that way, this is a big civic gesture. And it deserves to have a big landmark tower. You know, this place is serving a lot more functions than as a kind of reflective spot for the ancestors to rest. Oh, that one's kind of fresh. You know, it's a tree park. You know, every tree in here was deliberately planted. These are all different species. Some of these are native. There's some oaks. Some of these kind of evergreen guys are native. Some of them aren't. Pittsburgh's part of the Great Eastern Woodland, which is the forest that stretches kind of across Pennsylvania and up into New England, a little bit out into Ohio, and then you kind of hit the Midwest, and we kind of destroyed most of what forest was there, and also it wasn't quite the same forest type. Anyway, the Great Eastern Woodlands are kind of the same across the whole latitude, and looking kind of further out at the other hills, I know that it's really quite brown on this cold, rainy day, so this might just be a study in gray futility. But this mix of kind of middle of the road growth trees kind of cap out at 60 or 80 feet, and nothing's growing super big like a redwood or anything. Oh, there we go. You guys see that? This little pine plantation, 2 of them. And the rest of that's just ashes and oaks and all kinds of other fast-growing locust trees, tons of those. So we're on top of this big shale plateau. The whole Allegheny Plateau was kind of the seabed of the ocean that was the ocean before the Atlantic Ocean, because it was kind of 2 continental cycles ago. Excuse me. So as North America was separating from Europe and the Atlantic Ocean was forming in the trench between the two, the previous ocean that had kind of existed where the Atlantic was got moved westward and then lifted up and then eroded by water. And that's what we're standing on here. So you can see that even though we're in this kind of hill region that's all hills and valleys, the hills are pretty uniformly the same height. You know, you're only seeing variation because of you're seeing stands of trees and you're seeing a little bit of built environment. Yeah. And that's because this whole thing was the seafloor. And then wherever there were kind of imperfections or low spots, and there's a valley here. It's a little hard to spot, but there's another valley that's coming down here, and they meet right there. And so always in Pittsburgh, you get this view where you're on a hillside, and you have kind of a front yard that looks out and down, and you get one of these cool picturesque views of the stuff that's down on the valley floor weirdly close, you know. Always interestingly framed. Over at Carnegie Mellon in the University Center, there's a huge mural that was digitally composited onto the wall, but it's all hand-drawn, that has foregrounds and midgrounds that are very much like this, where they almost seem like they were composited of one kind of magazine cutout and then another cutout back here. In the case of this mural, it was all done with charcoal and pencil and paper, not magazine, so it's a much nicer aesthetic. But what you're looking at here is the giant eagle that's on Route 8. Route 8 is coming across here. These are all skylights, and then there's some amount of HVAC systems for their cooling area in the back. That's a loading dock right here. That's a shipping container for some temporary storage. The loading dock has, you load stuff in that way. That is a trailer which has had it's been left there. The truck is on its own. The trailer is on a little stand, guys. They're not little, they're about 5 feet tall. But in any case, Giant Eagle's parking lot. That's like a Rite Aid or a Walgreens. I think it's a Walgreens. And it's kind of cool. From up here, you can really see that, like, the flow of the two parking lots is not the same. They kind of fight. There's like an implied roadway there from maybe when this was going to get developed in a different way. There's actually even more of a foreground. There's like a welding shop here, and this is like a materials company. I think this is an electrical business. All of these are kind of active all the way down this row. There's a whole industrial center that's just behind all this, and you don't really see it from Route 8, because from Route 8 what you see is you see the Walgreens, you see the Giant Eagle, and then you actually see the train line that comes through here, the Allegheny Valley Railroad train line that comes across, keeps going down towards Pittsburgh, and then you start to seeing the kind of triangular shaped buildings and structures that are along the train line. Maybe later we'll go down there and check that out, but for now, I got to get back to walking. Yeah. I'm doing this on an iPad that was a gift from my dad and mom, which is really nice of them. I had a first generation iPad mini, and this is like the new, I guess, 5th generation iPad mini. So, real testament to the iPad mini. I mean, I drove that thing into the ground. That is my way, you know. This is the kind of sweeping view that I really love on a rainy day in Pittsburgh like this. You know, the weather I would characterize as awful. It's in the 40s, it's raining. It was in the 30s overnight, so everything's already kind of chilly and cold. So that it's all kind of wet now. It's just additional insult. Here is just a roadway that's lined with these evergreens. Let's keep walking. There's a book by Martin Orand called The Spectator and the Topographical City that is just really recommended reading for trying to understand how much the geology and geography of this place has influenced the way in which it was built on. And I think of the topographical city when I experience this kind of walking vertigo. You know, I am not zoomed in. If we zoom in, it's way worse. This is just, we are walking down one very steep slope intersecting with another very steep slope in a radically different direction. You know, in heavy rain, this is just scary to navigate for sure. Oh wow, and you can just see how much accumulation has come from all the runoff. This kind of accumulation pattern is clearly water driven. All these little floaty guys float and then they get redeposited, maybe sometimes by wind, but down here clearly by water. You know, and that's just how land does, right? These trees are not pulling themselves out of the ground. 99% of the carbon that makes up this big carbon foam tower, which is what this tree is atmospheric carbon. Very, very little of it's coming from the soil. It's precipitating this out of the atmosphere the way that rock candy grows in the bottom of a glass when you're making rock candy when you're a little kid. You know, and all it needs is just a little nucleation site where the roots have access to the minerals that they can't pull out of the atmosphere that they have to bring up from the earth. But the rest of this bad boy is just farms and factories doing their own thing up here in the green. You know, they don't really care what's going on around in the ground, which is why you can co-plant all kinds of stuff. You know, that's kind of the blessing of the forest, is that you have these huge structural columns that have most of the growth and then a wild diversity of weird other things growing in the partial shadow that it forms. We're not really in a forest right now. This is, you know, clearly a cemetery. Right, here's the drain that takes the majority of this water, puts it under a tunnel, sends it out that way. Probably if we go to the edge here, we'll see that it kind of kicks out off the hillside. Oh, we won't go to the edge here because it's kind of a cold and rainy day and I just don't want to. So if we take this trail here, it kind of goes back up towards the parking lot, back up towards the tower here, the landmark tower. You can see better that these evergreens are lining this street. It goes up. So we're actually going to go down here, down to the lower part of the cemetery. Maybe don't watch this part if you've got kids or are like real close to a death in your family, because this part might get a little dark. This is the part of the Rustbelt Ramble that's a little bit more about the God's honest truth and the real lay of the land in the situation, and not the part of the Rustbelt Ramble that's kind of the fun, happy, here's all this cool industry that we're doing part. This is the part that really kind of sucks. I don't know if you guys can see that, what we're coming up on here. Let me just pause and let you admire it from a distance. Yeah, this is indeed, the back end of the graveyard logistics. There are incoming clients constantly to this operation, and those clients inevitably need some of the same stuff, and though the gravestones might be different and the caskets might be different, the sepulchral cement boxes that all that stuff kind of goes into to reinforce the grave area, these are all the same. And these were kind of ordered once sometime in the 90s, and they've been drawing down on what you're looking at, which is the warehouse, and it goes on back into the woods quite a ways. We'll actually go ahead and just walk up to it. This is obviously not the part of the place that gets maintained super often. They actually have a staging ground that we'll get to further down, where kind of like the short-term, this year's ones are lined up, and then they come back here just once a year with like big machinery, bring all these guys down. And so last time I was here, this must have looked about the same, but they certainly go through them, One comes with hooks for the machinery to lift the lid off. These are pre-scored, so that as the coffin inevitably cracks, the cracks conglomerate just along this part. I guess it keeps them together longer. Slightly decorative. And of course, here's like the rework pile with the also rans damaged in transport or what have you. Really see the diversity of trees in the forest just by looking at all the different kinds of leaves that have been dropped. One here is maybe 8 inches wide, and there's some small leaves from smaller leaf trees that are, just an inch or two long. And nominally, it's this kind of beauty of nature that, this is nice. No hunting. This is a wonderful hillside for deer, I'm sure. It's steep, it's private, it's back behind all this other stuff. Gets quite a lot of sunlight. It's Pennsylvania, so when it comes to deer season, it's more of a question of where am I explicitly prohibited from hunting deer rather than where am I going to go hunt one. I don't know what that's about. That part of that must be some kind of family tradition, blooding ritual, related to the fox hunt or whatnot. Some amount of that I think is just provisions. Venison's good eating. Some of that is about maybe an urban-rural divide, trying to establish that there is kind of a culture that exists out in the hinterlands, even though what mostly exists out there is couches and 80-inch televisions and kind of like disturbed wilderness all around those bubbles of human housing. It's not quite the rustic cabins that I think people were really thinking of, and maybe has a little bit more compromise to it than they're ever willing to admit. But that's because people are proud of the place they come from, proud of the place they live, and pride in place is definitely something that Pennsylvania has. Look at this fucking tree. Beautiful oak. Absolutely magnificent tree. I believe that was a black oak. And it's a little hard to tell from the path here, but there are a couple of gravestones in this area. There's a lot of flat graves along this part of the hillside. This is kind of a promontory point here, and then there's a steep creek valley that runs down towards Route 8. Route 8 is coming down over there. This is not Elfin Road. I forget the name of this road. It's one way down the hill at this point, though. There's further cemetery beyond on this second escarpment, and there's actually an even further promontory point up there. And beyond this ridge, if you were to get far over into the far easternmost part of the graveyard and look north, you'd see that the Route 8 valley up here really opens up quite spectacularly, and there's 2 or 3 different streams that go off, and Route 8 continues up one of them, but it's just a big kind of oxbow curve, hollowed out area. It's quite an expansive part of the valley. Oh, hey, look, friends. There are indeed other people walking around. They're walking on the road, which is dubious. I shook my head side to side in discomfort, and also shook you guys. Sorry about that. Look at this tree, though. What a magnificent tree. Just beautiful. Who wouldn't want to be buried under this, right? And there's graves as close as kind of like right up around here, right up around here. Definitely under the leaf cover, right? The leaf drop from this tree is actually not really moved too much. It's just gone straight down. And yeah, it's covering up all kinds of folks' names and plaques. If I remember correctly, there's some number of veterans, and I think there's one flag right there still standing, that are buried in this section. This is kind of noted as being such. And maybe it's like down slope, kind of below the shale here, because these were kind of government mandated and paid for by the county or whomever, rather than being private burials that the graveyard's actually kind of making their rent on. These were kind of, I'll just put them in the ground, find them a spot, and I guess this is the spot. But, you know, joke's on the capitalists. What a tree, you know, what a eternal rest to rest against. Absolutely gorgeous specimen. You can see that it's gone through some amount of stem selection It's got this really beautiful structure, a mathematical tree structure, where the number of branches kind of subdivides and subdivides and subdivides, and you get this really pleasing kind of corona of tiny, tiny branches up at the top where the leaves end up growing, and where the actual kind of farming function of the tree happens, where the leaves absorb sunlight and are little sugar factories that turn the sunlight into useful energy for biological growth. And that as you get down and down and down, you get these amazing sort of curved buttresses of carbon that support all these little factories. And over time, these trees, every tree, most plants, are actually quite smart about what they're doing. Each one of these limbs is really kind of like a venture capital investment that may or may not pan out. And on a lot of species, you can see that limbs that didn't do so well, they didn't end up being in the sunlight. You can actually spot where the tree has decided to drop them away. You see those nodules up here. That was a deliberate decision that tree made over time. When I say decision, I'm not necessarily implying that this guy's got like a nervous system and a brain stem, but I do mean that, as a biological function, it made a collective action and decided to treat this one particular part of itself differently and start to build a bunch of xylem and phloem, blocking up the passages that led to that branch, and then cause it to be a deadfall as soon as there's some wind. The wind there is providing a service. It's taking away the excess carbon, giving it a little perturbation. So I think this is like a big hill of grave dirt, right? They're slowly taking the soil that's in the graveyard and kind of one body's amount at a time, one sepulchre box amount at a time, kind of piling it up over here. This is kind of the maintenance area at the back end of the graveyard. Here's some headstones that didn't quite take. And if you think I'm being disrespectful, you really don't get the point of this exercise. This is not disrespect. This is, in fact, keen respect for this place. This is a careful eye checking out the entirety of the operation, not just the parts that we like to look at, but the parts that actually happen at the back end. The infrastructure that supports mourning and loss and death. It's got a garage somewhere, it's got a backyard somewhere, has a erstwhile fuel pump in the woods. This is the kind of detail that I like to see in model railroading hobbyist models. If you can have kind of the natural parts that are near the rail line, that's pretty authentic. You got your woods, and there is a rail line just down in the valley there. But what you really want is your disrupted woods. Your woods that just have like a 30-year-old piece of infrastructure that's still kicking along, and even if it's not kicking along, no one's going to move it anywhere, nor are they going to deinstall these don't run into this box, it's flammable poles, which is what these are. Painted that OSHA yellow. You can't this is that real Rust Belt shit. Look at this. This is what the Rustbelt Ramble is about. Look at this. This is gonna be the cover image on the YouTube video. You can't get better than this. The only way to get this kind of patina is to just leave this thing in the woods for 30 years. Let it do its thing. So we're still walking through the Mount Royal Cemetery. This is Rustbelt Ramble. Down here, we're down in the maintenance part. It is part of the trail system. Some kind of inventorying purpose. And we got the Cadillacs. These have been carefully spray painted. You got your gold coffin, your ebony coffin, your ivory. These ones are for smaller bodies. Kind of a newborn, juvenile models, pre-palletized, slightly upsettingly. Right, but this is an active work yard. You can see all the skid marks lined up kind of recently. Some of these have been down stacked over here, getting ready to, I'm surprised on a Wednesday that this isn't a more active site. So part of the aim of this is to experiment with live blogging or kind of walk blogging with this new iPad that I got as a gift from my family, which was really nice, sort of an early Christmas present. The thing about technology presents like this is that, they're kind of best used immediately. If you're shipping someone like a cool thing, there's no real big reason to wait until Christmas, like, just let them open it. You can get some use out of it immediately. Well, that's my feeling anyway. I am a kind of practical gift giver, though. Holidays of efficiency and thrift. What I've gifted you with is the eye with which I've spotted a good bargain for you. In a lot of ways, graveyards are a bit like cities or like factory buildings or any other industrial concern that takes up some amount of area and space. It might not look like it, but this whole place has been plotted and zoned. And even though there may be kind of roads that are paved, there are also rights of way that are not, but which nonetheless are kind of key parts of maintaining the place. Every one of these big lawns has to get maintenance, by which I mean a human driving around kind of trimming the thing every couple weeks on rotation. It's quite a lot of acres, so they have some full-time dudes that just keep this whole park looking like it looks all throughout the year, just a little bit despite the seasons, going so far as to remove the little saplings and suckers that grow up around older trees like this on species that want to have little clone kids as the genetics realize that they're kind of going and the telomeres have kind of burned down to their embers. They want to start a new set of genetically identical, whole copse around them, as is the way of some trees. But, this tractor there, or one of its brethren, has carefully come around and taken all that stuff out with big rotating blades, or going back in with trimmers. And this is kind of the unnatural power that humans have over the landscape, is that we're capable of altering our action in pretty dedicated ways, and doing so kind of on a dime. When we decide to take a couple acres of hillside and maintain it as a big artificial walking park that has kind of pre-planted, purposefully planted tree species, particular specimens of particular note planted by particular people to remember particular other people, or just to increase the botanical range of the area, depending on, I guess, kind of how controlling and botanist-like the original designer of the place wanted to be. But we decided this was so, and we made it so, and we maintain it so. And the crew to keep this whole kind of neighborhood of trees and graves together is surprisingly small and efficient. So, this is a testament to something, a certain particular vision of what death looks like, which is kind of a natural, unnatural pause in the world. Here we have another riparian zone in the site, and it's good they planted all these thirsty trees here to reinforce the hillside, or this would have slumped off long ago, exposing God knows how many grandmas to the light of day again. Confusingly, I think in the past this was actually, I know that this was multiple graveyards, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think in the past this was actually even more. This planting here feels a lot like a property line, even though it's maybe just an artificial product of the parking lot there. There's another really great tree. Almost looks like lungs. All that brachiation. I guess maybe lungs look like it is the better term, better understanding. There's the Elf and Wild fire station back there. So we're back up at the top of the hill at the landmark tower in view again. The funeral home. This line of trees. But I keep feeling like it's a property line. I mean, it's also just where the edge of the road behind the funeral home goes. And then this is the road we came up. That's that same tractor that we were distinctly below, not very long ago. Just a testament to the incline. Quite amazing. And we got the Elfenwild Fire Department over there. Bus stops for the Pittsburgh Port Authority. I'm always a sucker for classical revivals, so I really appreciate this memorial pavilion here with the statue in the middle. It's really quite lovely. And the traffic kind of quiets, and you just have kind of this view of the architecture and the trees and the sky. Really calms you down. What a landmark tower, man. Just huge. Here we got the classic silent guns looking out over the field of veterans. You can see by the flags. Closer to the national holidays, there's a lot more flags. These are kind of the persistent ones that family comes and reinstalls, or which the weather hasn't kind of stripped away. I've always kind of felt that the double height veranda here really adds a kind of plantation feel to the funeral home that maybe is not warranted. We're a good 50-60 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line, and it just seems a little excessive. But I guess there's no accounting for taste. This is about as imperial as our country gets. Neoclassical statue of one of the founders. Pittsburgh likes to claim a special relationship with George Washington, seeing as when he worked for the British, he was a scout for the British Army. General Braddock was his commanding officer, and he was scouting western Pennsylvania to find out the size of the French and Indian fort here at the point, Fort Duquesne, and it was overwhelmingly larger than the British had decided it was, though his reports were not as believed by General Braddock as he wished they would have been. In any case, he spent a couple of weeks here kind of checking out the landscape as essentially a spy, somewhere between somebody just traveling around the area looking for people to trade with and someone really seriously gathering military intel. That's our guy, that's our man George. So here's the side of the funeral home. And they're really quite generous. This parking lot is open to the public who want to park and walk around the graveyard. And in that way, they really provide a service. Of course, during a big funeral, this whole thing fills up, and so do all of the side roads and the walking paths and everything. But That's okay. I mean, it's like a funeral. Somebody died. You know, show some respect. These are, of course, not graves of real people. This is the showroom for the kind of graves that kind of come with the graveyard. And you know, they have particular vendors for each of the different types. But yeah, it's a big process. This is a big graveyard, so there's some amount of the process that's kind of streamlined on behalf of the user. Selection, you know, you got your Buicks, you got your Cadillacs, you know, this is the range of graves that'll happen here at this particular graveyard. So we haven't gone more than 20 or 30 feet. I'm just walking right here into this part of the graveyard, which I hope your keen eye notices, as mine does, kind of a distinctly different vibe in this part of the graveyard. There's a couple of different things going on. For one thing, trees are planted a lot more close together. Gravestones are a lot older and in much older styles. And indeed, the birth and death dates on any random gravestone are back in the 1890s. This one's 1859. Miss Sophie. Rest in peace, guys. So this is kind of a smaller graveyard within the graveyard. It's characterized by this central ring around this cross, this memorial cross, and then there's a X of bushes that are planted there, and there's some pines coming around and some other smaller trees planted, and there's just this extremely dense subdevelopment of graves right in the middle of the larger graveyard. Well, this was actually a different graveyard. This was the Oakland graveyard in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's 7 miles south, way down there. And this particular graveyard was on an eastern-facing hill slope, so that right at the edge of the city, so that the people who were buried here, who were really originally buried here, you know, the oldest and grandest of these graves, were really buried. The newspapers phrased it something like, since they're the easternmost graveyard and they're facing the dawn, these will be the first risen spirits of our Pittsburgh brethren when the time comes, you know. And that prominence and kind of future heavenly prosperity of a second better life in the afterlife was really what the whole endeavor was about, spiritually, at the time that these folks were getting buried. This is kind of what this place was for, was to be a nice little park for their spirits to walk around in until that one really important sunrise where their Lord and Savior came back and they all went up to heaven. So I think in like the 20s, the University of Pittsburgh expanded their campus up that hill slope from the kind of valley bottoms of Oakland up the hillside, and this whole thing needed to move. So the cemetery here said, oh, Mount Royal Cemetery can host this, and they just reinterred everybody, plot for plot, grave for grave, 7 miles north. I think at that point the city limits had also extended, and Wilkinsburg had kind of been chopped up from what it had originally been, which was almost a second city as large as Pittsburgh, and that extended almost all the way out to Irwin into kind of various municipalities, and then it was kind of a suburb that got half incorporated, which is part of why it's got such a big municipal burden. It's kind of holding one end of a log that the city of Pittsburgh is also holding up in terms of their water and sewer infrastructure, and one of those players is clearly much bigger than the other. And I don't want to say that they're bullies, but I do want to say that it's maybe not the most fair relationship. Though, talking water and sewer in Allegheny County, the Pittsburgh-Wilkinsburg problems are nothing compared to the wonderful hills that you see before you. The North Hills here are going to be Game of Thrones-esque kind of slow mutual stranglehold over the next 20-30 years when it comes to water rights and off-flow and being able to safely vent everybody's sewer systems. Because we've kind of overbuilt. Even though we've kind of underutilized a lot of Western Pennsylvania, the parts that we built on, we really kind of overbuilt. These are all valleys that are meant to communicate vast quantities of water, and rather than making them cool sponges that do so gently and over time and are able to absorb the rainfall we get and redirect it productively locally, we've given ourselves kind of like a poop nightmare where we just take all our rainwater and like mix it with our poop water in the most unideal mix possible. But that's not the restive vibe that we're supposed to have here in the graveyard. I might cut all that out of the mix, but there we go. Well, this has been the Rustbelt Rambler. I hope this has been an appropriate amount of rambling. We've walked this graveyard. We've checked out this landmark tower from various different angles. I might kind of addend some video down in the industrial park down below to this, but I think our time in the graveyard's come to a close. Also, I gotta figure out a better way of holding this iPad. My shoulder feels all weird. This is a classic Western Pennsylvania industrial valley. This is Butler Plank Road, which comes off of Route 8 over at the intersection to the left that white car is going towards. There's a little valley stream right behind the roadway here. That building up on cement stilts is on the other side of the stream. This bridge right by IPMR, Industrial Pump and Motor Repair, is actually a bridge and not just a little roadway. That bridge goes over the creek. This big cut in the hillside is where Route 8 kind of comes around here, and it's also where the train tracks come across, make the valley a little bit wider. But Butler Plank Road here kind of winds its way up the hill. It actually is connected to a sort of different part of the valley, the creeks that are coming down off of the graveyard, which is all up right here. And then over here in this kind of pocket corner of the valley, there are just a whole variety of businesses. There's a notary public over there, a garden store, there's a materials corporation here, there's an industrial laboratory, landscaping supply company, a couple of other things. We got Industrial Pump and Motor Co. That's that red and gray building over there on the other side of that little bridge over the creek. And yeah, we really just kind of wedged everything in here and paved it all over. This is obviously a riparian valley. It's got that classic kind of V shape. It was formed by water, and then it's been flattened down into a U because all of what we've built, all of this pavement, is actually sitting on top of alluvial floodplain, which is to say the silt from the highland hillsides further up the valley, which has been deposited here over time. It's all the soil that's been built up over time, which typically, used to move around constantly. This stream would kind of wind its way back and forth, widening this valley out, redistributing itself every couple of years as the mud bank shifted. And we kind of froze all that in time and in place, and have been fighting against the movement of all of these streams and all of these valleys for 200 years now. And we're not winning. It's kind of a dumb war that we didn't need to fight. We just choose to fight it. Like, we can build, it's possible to build in a different way that lets nature act in a little bit simpler and more rational manner that's also more understandable for us, and even more additionally kind of works for everybody involved much better longer term. But instead we have kind of like paved it all over and made it into a big crazy channel for floodwaters. And with floodwaters in cities come combined sewer overflows in America, and that's where you get that poop rain. Nobody likes that. But, oh, this guy's making a big wide turn. Means that geometry. It's a full 53-foot trailer. Talon Logistics. They're local. They have an operation in Pittsburgh. Now we're down here right at creek level, and here's the creek right here. You can see the real shale characteristics of the rock around here. These are just layers and layers of old ocean bed compressed down, and this water is very slowly cutting through all of it. This whole place was laid down flat, and it stayed pretty flat. Over at the Allegheny Mountains to the east of here, and actually the whole of the Appalachian Range, is this same shale material, but as Proto-America and Proto-Europe smashed into each other during the creation of Gondwana, the supercontinent, or Pangaea, one of those two, it caused the whole landscape to buckle, and it created both the Appalachian Range and also the Scottish Highlands, the kind of underwater mountain range between Scotland and Norway, and then like the upper tippy bit of upper Scandinavia. That was all kind of one big crinkle of the same ancient debris. Layers and layers of ocean.